She wasn't just lying about her job. She was living an entirely different life, right under my nose. And the worst part? I only realized it when I shook her hand, and she looked at me like I didn't belong there. Because in her world, I didn't exist. It started with what looked like a stable, ordinary marriage. I was 33. She was 31. 6 years together. We split rent on a 2-bedroom apartment on the quieter side of the city, cooked pasta on weeknights, and watched whatever was on Netflix without arguing about it. Nothing dramatic ever happened between us. No slammed doors. No weeks of silence. I believed we were solid because nothing suggested otherwise. She left for work at 7:40 every morning. Same gray blazer. Same black coffee in the steel thermos I bought her for our anniversary. She returned between 18:15 and 19:30 depending on traffic. Her stories were always short. Busy day. Late meeting. Corporate chaos I never pushed. The details sounded boring enough to be true. But after the second year, I started noticing the gaps. She never mentioned a single coworker by name. No Sarah from accounting. No tired jokes about Dave in IT. No eye rolls about the new manager. When I asked how her team was doing, she gave me the same 3 sentences rearranged. The office moved floors. Someone quit. The coffee machine broke again. Nothing stuck. Nothing felt lived in. At 23:41 Thursday, I lay awake while she slept beside me. Her phone sat on the nightstand, screen dark. I watched the faint blue light from the street lamp move across the ceiling and wondered why her work never seemed to leave any trace on her. No forgotten sticky notes in her bag. No group chat notifications at odd hours. Just the same neutral updates delivered in the same neutral voice. My best friend, Mark, noticed before I did. He had known me since college, long before I met her. We still grabbed beers every other Friday at the same bar near my office. One night in early October, he set his glass down at 21:55 and asked how her job was going. I gave him the usual summary. He listened, nodded once, then changed the subject. But his eyes stayed on me a second too long. 2 weeks later, he called me at 8:15 while I was still on the train. He sounded careful. Said he had run into someone at a networking event who worked in the same building she claimed to be in. The floor she mentioned didn't match any company on record. The name of her supposed employer pulled up no recent listings under that exact branding. Small discrepancies. Easy to explain away. Still, they sat in my stomach like loose change I couldn't spend. I didn't confront her. I just started watching closer. At 18:42 she came home smelling faintly of cigarette smoke, though she had quit 3 years earlier. Her blazer carried no creases from sitting at a desk all day. The bottom of her shoes showed fresh scuffs that looked more like pavement than office carpet. She set her bag down, kissed my cheek, and gave me the usual line about a long meeting. I nodded and stirred the sauce on the stove. That night at 0:17, I stood in the bathroom brushing my teeth while she scrolled through her phone in bed. The reflection in the mirror showed her face lit by the screen, expression blank, thumb moving slowly. She closed the app the moment I stepped back into the room. I told myself it was nothing. Couples develop routines. People get tired of talking about work. Trust was supposed to fill the empty spaces, but the hollow stories kept coming. And Mark kept noticing. Something about her identity had begun to feel borrowed, like she was describing a life she had studied instead of lived. The gaps were small, almost polite, yet they refused to close, and I still had no idea how deep they actually went. It began with something small. We sat at our usual corner table at 21:20 on a Friday. Mark set his glass down and asked the question directly. I paused mid-sip. For the first time I realized I couldn't answer it cleanly. Corporate stuff. Meetings. Emails. That was all I had. The words felt thin even as I said them. He didn't let it pass. He leaned back, eyes steady, and kept watching me. Every time her job had come up in conversation over the years, the same pattern appeared. No surnames, no clear faces. Just vague placeholders. My colleague said this. Someone at work mentioned that. My team is dealing with deadlines. Nothing ever anchored to a real person. I shrugged and changed the subject that night. But the observation stayed lodged in my mind like a small stone in a shoe. 2 days later, at 19:55, Mark brought it up again while we waited for the bill. He mentioned casually that he should meet some of her coworkers sometime, just to put names to faces. The sentence landed between us and stayed there. I nodded, but something shifted in my chest. I had never met any of them either. Not once in 6 years. No office Christmas parties I was invited to. No quick drinks after work when her team celebrated a project. No weekend barbecues with the usual crowd. The realization settled slowly, cold and precise, while I paid the check at 2040. I told myself it didn't mean anything. Plenty of couples kept their work lives separate. Some people preferred it that way. I adjusted the thought until it fit again. But Mark wasn't finished noticing. The following week he sent me a short message at 8:15. He had looked up the building she claimed to work in. The company name she sometimes used didn't appear on any current tenant list for that floor. Small mismatch. Easy to dismiss if you wanted to. I stared at the text for a long time before deleting it. That evening she came home at 1850 carrying the same black bag and the same neutral expression. She mentioned another late meeting. I watched her hang the blazer on the hook by the door and wondered why the fabric still looked freshly pressed after 12 hours away. The gaps were no longer just empty space. They had started to take shape. And Mark kept feeding me new fragments, one quiet observation at a time. Each one small enough to ignore. Each one heavy enough to remember. I still didn't know what lay behind the careful vagueness, but the surface had begun to crack in places I could no longer pretend weren't there. It started escalating slowly. Mark began paying closer attention. At a dinner on Saturday at 19:30, he asked her about her office in that easy way of his. She answered with the same calm smile she always used. Pretty standard. Open space, meetings, nothing special. Again, no names, no floor number. No detail that could be pinned down and checked. He didn't push, but the vagueness sat with him. Later that week at 22:10, Mark ran a simple search on her company from his couch. The department she had mentioned existed on paper, yet no employee directory, no LinkedIn profile, no internal announcement carried her name. Not even a passing mention. He told himself privacy settings could explain it. Still, the absence felt deliberate. Things got worse from there. One Tuesday evening at 23:40, I watched her from the kitchen. A message lit up her phone on the counter. She moved fast, turning the screen down with a single smooth motion. Too practiced, too clean. The kind of reflex that comes from repetition. She continued unloading the dishwasher as if nothing had happened. I kept drying the plate in my hand without comment. Mark started tracking patterns on his own. Her late nights didn't always line up with the meeting time she gave me. Some evenings she came home at 25 wearing different earrings than the one she left in at 7:45. The perfume she carried when she walked through the door at 19:20 was heavier. Sharper than the light scent she had sprayed in the bathroom that morning. Small shifts. Easy to miss unless someone was looking. Then came the inconsistency that finally broke the surface. She mentioned a coworker named James during breakfast one morning, someone she said had worked with her for years. Mark heard the name and froze inside. He had his own colleague named James in a completely different department across town. 2 days later at 12:30, Mark asked that James directly if he knew her. The answer came back flat. No, never heard of her. The silence between the three of us changed shape after that. It stopped feeling like casual curiosity. It started feeling like investigation. Mark kept his findings to himself for now. But I could see the weight in the way he looked at me during our next beer at 21:15. None of us were prepared for what arrived next. Because Mark received an invitation to a corporate event the following week. A formal mixer hosted by a partner company. The guest list included her name, officially, as an attendee from her supposed department. The event was set for Thursday at 18 o'clock, and for the first time, the three of us would be in the same room with whatever version of her reality she had built. It started with what was supposed to be a simple corporate event. Networking, drinks, low lighting and quiet industry chatter. Mark arrived first at 17:50 and took a position near the bar where he could watch the entrance. He expected to see her in her usual mode, reserved, slightly distant, the same woman who came home to our flat in London every evening. But when she walked in at 18:12, everything shifted. She moved through the room like she belonged there, shoulders back, smile easy. She greeted people with quick touches on arms and familiar laughs that carried across the floor. The reserved woman I knew had disappeared. This version owned the space. She leaned in when others spoke, nodded with genuine interest, and slipped between conversations without hesitation. Mark stayed still, glass in hand, observing every detail. Then the introduction came at 1827. A senior colleague raised his drink and presented her to a small circle. He spoke warmly about how valuable she was to the team, especially now that she was engaged. The word landed cleanly. Engaged. The colleague continued without pause. Mentioned her fiancé, their plans to move in together soon in Manchester. Manchester. I lived with her in London. We had signed a new lease 6 months earlier. Mark's grip tightened on the glass. In that single moment, the entire structure of her life split open. She wasn't simply vague about work. She wasn't just protecting her privacy. She maintained a second identity, a second relationship, an entirely separate life in another city where she was not married at all. In that life, she was single, engaged to someone else. He remained motionless near the bar and watched her laugh at a joke across the room. Completely natural, completely at ease in a skin he had never seen her wear before. At 1835, their eyes met. For half a second only. A flicker across the crowded floor. Her smile tightened at the edges. The change was small, almost invisible to anyone else. Not warmth, not casual recognition. It was something sharper. Controlled. Fear. She looked away first and continued her conversation as if nothing had happened. Mark didn't move. He simply watched her navigate the rest of the evening with the same effortless confidence, while the new facts settled into place like pieces of a puzzle that no longer fit the picture I thought I had. The woman who came home to me every night was only one version, and now he knew there was another one entirely. One that lived in Manchester, wore a different future, and had just realized that her two worlds had finally touched. The question that remained was how long she had been keeping them apart, and what else was still hidden behind the version that slept beside me. Mark left the event at 1847 without saying a word to anyone. He walked straight out into the cold London evening and didn't stop until he reached his car. The damage was already done. He now carried proof, not suspicion. Clear, undeniable proof that she was living two complete identities at the same time. He called me at 23:15 that night. His voice was low and careful. He gave me only pieces at first. He had seen her at the corporate event. She had not been alone in the way I understood. I tried to brush it aside, suggesting it was just work, just networking. He didn't let the moment pass. He told me they had introduced her as single. Engaged. Not married to anyone in London. The line went quiet for a long time, even while I muttered that he must have misunderstood. The ground under the sentence felt unstable. Something had already stopped adding up. I hung up at 23:40 and sat in the dark living room with my laptop open. That night I started checking everything. I pulled up her old calendar entries, credit card statements I could access, and the vague notes she sometimes left on the fridge. The late meetings didn't always match the time she came home. Entire weekends appeared where she claimed to be at a team offsite, but no record of any such event existed. Manchester kept surfacing in small fragments: train tickets, a hotel booking under a slightly different spelling of her name, a restaurant charge at 21:20 on a Friday she told me she was working late in London. A second timeline slowly took shape. Then came the final confirmation at 2:35. I found the hidden social media account after digging through old email addresses she no longer used. It was set to private, but the preview images were enough. In that account, she existed as someone else entirely. Different surname, different job title, different city listed as home. The photos showed her smiling beside another man, his arm around her waist, her head against his shoulder. Captions calling her his fiancée. One post from 3 months earlier mentioned their upcoming move-in together. I closed the laptop at 3:10 and stared at the wall. This wasn't ordinary cheating with stolen hours and secret texts. She had constructed an entire parallel life from the ground up. Two separate realities maintained with precision, never allowed to touch. One here in London with me, one in Manchester with him. Now the walls between them had begun to crack. Mark's call had started the collision. The event had forced the first overlap. And I sat alone in our flat at 4:20 knowing that the version of her who slept beside me most nights was only half the story. The other half was still moving, still breathing, still engaged to someone else in another city. And I had no idea which version would reach me first when the rest of it finally broke open. The confrontation didn't happen over text or a call. It happened at 19:25 when she turned the key in the lock exactly as she always did. Same hour. Same neutral expression on her face. She stepped inside, closed the door behind her, and froze mid-step. Mark and I were both waiting in the living room. No lights turned down. No attempt to hide it. She didn't look startled. She looked calculated. As if she had run this exact scenario in her mind many times, just not on this particular Tuesday. I spoke first, voice low and flat. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she placed her bag on the chair by the door with deliberate slowness, smoothing the strap once, twice. Then she lifted her eyes and delivered the sentence that cut straight through the room. She said I was never supposed to find each other. That wasn't denial. That was admission. Clean. Immediate. Final. I took one step closer. She exhaled through her nose, and for the first time the practiced calm fractured. She told me he was someone she became when she needed to disappear. Mark cut in, stating the obvious, that she had built 2 lives. She gave a small nod and corrected him without hesitation. Not built, maintained. 2 survivals. The words hung between us like smoke that refused to clear. In Manchester, she wasn't simply dating or engaged in some casual way. She had been planning an entire future there. Property viewings. A house deposit already discussed. A wedding date quietly circled on a different calendar. A life where the flat in London, the ring on her finger from me, and the man waiting in this room simply did not exist. I stood there absorbing the shape of it. This wasn't a messy affair that had spiraled out of control. It was a system. Engineered. Balanced. 2 separate realities running in parallel for years, each one insulated, each one functional, until the insulation finally tore. She remained standing near the door, posture still composed, but her fingers had begun to press into the back of the chair. Mark watched her without blinking. I watched the small tremor in her left hand that she tried to hide by shifting her weight. The mask had slipped just enough to show the machinery underneath. And as the silence stretched past 1940, one question refused to settle. If this was how carefully she had kept both worlds alive, what else had she engineered that we still hadn't seen? There was no dramatic ending, no raised voices, no final accusations that cleared the air. Just silence that stretched from 1945 until she finally turned and walked into the bedroom at 2010. She closed the door without slamming it. I remained in the living room with Mark until he left at 21:30. The flat felt smaller after that. Legal separation papers arrived by courier at 9:15 3 days later. She signed them at the kitchen table without reading every page. I watched her pen move across the lines in steady, unhurried strokes. No tears. No negotiation. She simply slid the documents back into the envelope and left them on the counter. The Manchester fiancé vanished from public view almost immediately. His social media accounts went dark within 48 hours. Old photos disappeared. The house listing they had been viewing was taken offline. It looked as if he had stepped backward into the same controlled illusion she had maintained for years. She didn't fight the exposure. She didn't offer any final explanations or try to soften the damage. She simply packed 2 suitcases over the next 4 evenings, always between 1850 and 1940, folding clothes with the same precise movements I had seen for 6 years. Each night the flat grew quieter. Both lives had collided at full speed. Neither one survived intact. I found her sitting at the dining table at 23:40 on the last night, staring at nothing. The engagement ring from Manchester was no longer on her finger. The one from me still sat in a small dish by the sink where she had left it days earlier. She didn't touch either of them. She moved out at 7:55 the following morning. A single cab waited downstairs. She took only what fit in the trunk. No long goodbyes. No final glance back at the door. Just the soft click of the latch as it shut behind her. The flat stayed exactly as she left it for weeks. Her half of the closet empty. One coffee mug still on the drying rack. A faint trace of her perfume lingering in the bathroom until it finally faded. I kept expecting some last revelation to surface, some hidden layer that would explain why she needed 2 entire realities running at once. But nothing came. Only the clean, surgical removal of a life she had carefully split in half for years. And the quiet knowledge that even now, after everything had collapsed, parts of her story remained carefully buried where neither I nor the man in Manchester would ever reach them. What remained wasn't anger anymore. It was something quieter. The realization that deception doesn't always look like lying. Sometimes it looks like consistency, routine, predictability. A life so carefully constructed that no one thinks to question it. Until every version of it exists in the same room. And then the only question left is the one nobody wants to answer. How long had she been living as two people before either of them realized she wasn't fully either one?